The following is a special presentation of the Decibel Geek podcast. This is the Decibel Geek podcast with Aaron Camaro and Chris Sinzak.
All right, buckle up. Here we go. Once again, one more time. Here we are. It's the Decibel Geek podcast. My name is Aaron Camaro, joined as always by my awesome friend and kick-ass co-host, Chris Sinzak. What's going on, brother?
Oh, not much. I think I'm a little happier than you are today. We're not going to get into too much football, but my team is going on to the Super Bowl, and your team had their season ended. But
no Decibel Geek playoff championship this year.
Yeah, but I am paying for it today. I have a massive hangover from last night.
Oh, I'm just dealing with depression, but it'll pass. It'll pass.
Yeah, but exciting guest today. Something that we've wanted to do for a very, very long time. A subject that is near and dear to everybody, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. We got to take care of the business first, though.
Yeah, most definitely got some cool business to handle right here. We've got a sweet, sweet Apple Podcast review. In case you don't know, we love reviews. We really love them a lot. You can give them to us. We appreciate it. And when they're awesome like this one, we're going to read it on the show. So this one's entitled, Love This Podcast. It's got all 5 stars, and it goes like this. I fall into the perfect age group for this podcast. I was 6 in 78 and became a lifelong Kiss fan that year, and all the music that surrounded them. I feel like I'm back in high school shooting the shit with my music geek buddies, and I love every minute of it. It's an awesome review. It comes to us from J. Mike Mack via Apple Podcasts from right here in the good old USA. Gotta love that. And that's how it's done, right there. Simple, easy, just like that. You can be cool like J. Mike Mack, and you can leave us a podcast review on Apple iTunes. You can do it on Podchaser, and you can even leave us a Facebook recommendation. That's right. As you know, we're not joking. We really love these things, and it helps out the show, too. So helps us get out to more people. More chance to see it, they might read your review and go, that sounds awesome. I'm going to check out the Decibel Geek podcast. And the party continues to grow. If you love to party with the Decibel Geek podcast, here's something you can do. Become a Decibel Geek VIP real quick. It's sweet. It's easy. It's over on Patreon.com. There's over 100 episodes of the Chris and Aaron Show. I know that. This is the important time of every episode now that I feel like I got to ask, because we do have the Torpedo Dudes podcast, which is Chris and I's Kiss show. And, I got to ask, did the Ace Frehley thing go up yet?
It's going up in the morning. I promise.
You heard it here first, people. Going up in the morning, he promises. If you are a Decibel Geek VIP and you love Kiss, you like the Torpedo Dudes, look forward to that. But don't worry, I'll ask him again next week.
He will without fail.
So that's cool, man. So, we're huge Kiss fans. Chris and I, we grew up being Kiss fans. And, that we do that Torpedo Dudes podcast on the side just for fun. And we always love to talk about the early days of Kiss, the up and coming, the nitty gritty, the fighting to get there. Not the Kiss that's the biggest thing in the world and later on in the 70s, but that scene in New York City, man, where Kiss came up and a bunch of other great bands, it's something special. I know we're both big fans of it.
Yeah, and we're going to get to some of that in a minute, but our other favorite people are the Geeks of the Week this week. These are the people that share it on Facebook, retweeted on Twitter. Last week's New Noise episode, good feedback on that one. That was a fun one to do. Always nice to catch up on the news.
Oh, yeah.
Geeks of the Week this week are Adam Cox, Jeffrey Mendenhall, Sit and Spin with Joe, Cobras and Fire podcast, Simon Katz, Shay Hargett, Mark and Jerry B's Sessions. That's a new one. Mark Alden Taylor, Freeform Rock podcast, David Glenn, Wayne Cross, Mike Parnell, The Bakery podcast, Aaron Baker, Kristen Schimbeck, David Cathy, Scott Crouch, Pantheon podcast, JJP Body of the Soul, Jay Shabluski, Sean Cullen, Sign of the Times, Kevin Williams, Baco, MJ Condoleone, I think I did that right, Hakon Bergstad, Keith Rockford, Vet Halen, Entropy, Kevin Northern, and as always,
The Mooger Fooger.
Fooger.
Man, I was so excited. I feel terrible. I was so excited to get into this talk about early 70s New York scene that I almost forgot about the Geeks of the Week and all that. I was ready to get right into it.
But you like the way I segued right into it, though?
You did, man. As soon as you started talking about it, I was like, oh, shit, Geeks of the Week. What am I doing? Oh, man. It's not like we've been doing this for almost 10 years.
I know, no, not at all. But yeah, so we got, recently we heard about the passing of Sylvain Sylvain from the New York Dolls, and anyone who's familiar with this show knows that we love that. A time travel moment would be to go to the 70s and go to the New York rock scene of the 70s and see all those bands and go to because even the clubs are as famous as the bands. And our guest today, we're going to talk about a lot of that with. He's a man of many talents. Like he's a musician, but he's a writer, and he's worked on films, and he's done a lot of stuff, and he's been a listener of our show for a long time, and I follow him on Facebook, and he's posted so many cool things where it's like, wow, he was in the middle of like a lot of this stuff, and he knew a lot of these people. So when Syl passed, I was just like, I know he knew him, so let's try to bring him onto the show. So making his Decibel Geek debut, Mr. Tony Mann. How's it going, Tony?
Hey everyone, how are you? Nice to finally get to talk to you guys on the show.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. Looks like you're sitting where Kiss took that shot on top of the Empire State Building.
Yeah, it does look like that, but actually I live downtown, but I do live in Manhattan, so yeah, not too far.
Very cool. So I mean, can you kind of give a brief summary of you and your history with the New York rock scene?
Okay. Well, I'm a New Yorker. I'm a musician. I've been a costume designer, author, worked on films, so kind of all the arts, even some theater. And so even though it's a big city, it's a real small scene. And honestly, back in the day, you could run into just about anybody on the street here, And I'm not a shy person. I'll go up to someone and say hello. It was a lot of opportunity to meet all kinds of people from all walks of life. And I took advantage of that and been lucky enough to know a lot of famous and not famous people that were really cool. And it's been a really cool life to spend here, during all these eras and see the changes in the city and all that. It's really gone through a lot, especially now with what's going on. So, now we have time to reflect on things. And unfortunately, a lot of people have been passing away. So, then you really look back and appreciate knowing these people like, Ramones or New York Dolls or whatever artist, musician, And if you're in the East Village and, I've lived in Harlem, East Village, Lower East Side for the most recent time, Lower East Side. And my uncle used to live down here when I was a kid. So I've always kind of been around, traveling around different parts of the city. And, I'm into all different kinds of music, rock, jazz, funk. I've seen, all those people and worked with some of them in one way or another. And, it's been a real privilege to get to know some people here where, I've lived in other places and, different population, different kind of people. Although I did, when I did live in New Hampshire, for a while. And when I lived there, I played with Gigi Allen and I was friends with Brad Delpo, Boston, and people like that. So I guess I kind of gravitate to like-minded, creative individuals. And especially in the 60s and 70s, and, this city was very energetic and inspirational, creative hub because, it was a lot cheaper to live here then. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the city was busted, messed up. But, it was kind of like being in a gang to live here. I think a lot of people from other cities were, had a fear of New York, actually, when I was a kid. Even if you went wherever, and some guy could be bigger than you, but if you were I'm from New York, they might just run away just because of who said that. So, anyway, after 9/11, things took a different turn because people, felt some sympathy for what was going on here and whatnot. But before that, it was kind of like being in a gang to live here. It was like a badge, and you had to, kind of have a sixth sense of walking around, and especially if you're a freaky rock guy like I was, or you had to watch yourself and have go on your instincts. So I've been able to survive, luckily, and many people haven't, and that's unfortunate. But it's kind of like it's an energetic city, and that's why a lot of people come here to get inspiration to do their art and pull it out of them. Whatever's inside you. You see other people doing something, and you might not even be copying them, but you just feel inspired to do something.
Yeah,
it's kind of like that.
That's very cool.
So let's go back. Like, what were some of the first, like club shows and stuff that you experienced in New York, and when were those?
Oh, okay. So when I was a kid, my parents and my family was always very supportive of my interest in music, art, and creative things. And my parents weren't musicians. My dad a little bit. My uncles, a couple of them were musically inclined. One of my uncles is a very good musician, but there was a lot going on. You could almost go out every day or night, maybe multiple times, to see something amazing then. And I remember seeing The Who play Tommy at the Fillmore East when I was a little kid. It's one of the first shows I remember. And I met The Who, I met Keith Moon, and I met all these guys, and you could just walk up to them, It wasn't any big deal. So earliest shows I remember, one of them would be, early Who shows, shows at Madison Square Garden of different bands, outdoor shows in Central Park. Pretty much every artist you can imagine played here. Like I saw Elvis, I saw, I didn't see the Beatles. That was a little before my time, but I saw them all play separately, and I met all of them at different times.
Wow.
And so it kind of, before John Lennon was murdered, celebrity wasn't an issue here. That's why people came here. Like, they could just walk down the street and, oh, there's Frank Zappa or whoever. Nobody would really say anything to them except maybe hello, and they would just go about their business. But kind of after the John Lennon thing, security and other things became a real issue, and people focused on that, and it became like a thing, and people were more conscious of it. But before that, you could just walk in backstage. If you acted like you belonged there, nobody said anything. If you looked like it, and that was the way it was. And a lot of these people hung out at different bars and venues, and I could go to bars as a kid and nobody really cared. And speaking of New York Dolls, before New York Dolls in New York, there weren't really many clubs. There weren't clubs to play. Okay. There was a couple places, but they were like discotheques or whatever they called it. There weren't really many clubs. And the Velvet Underground became well known, and they were basically, funded, encouraged by Andy Warhol, and Andy Warhol art scene, and they played at his happenings and all that. And so, he was behind them, and they were a big New York band. And then, of course, Lou Reed came out and became a huge, important solo artist out of that. One of the most New York artists, really. And so after that, a lot of bands were inspired by British rock, like, Beatles, Stones, The Who, Led Zeppelin, and all blah, blah, blah. And the guys in New York Dolls were kind of a ragtag bunch of people that they were inspired by all these bands. And Sylvain was actually from Cairo, Egypt.
Yeah. And
he was born in Cairo, Egypt, and his family was kicked out because they were Jewish, and they moved to France for a little while in Montmartre, which is like a creative section of Paris. And they lived there a while. Then they moved to Buffalo, New York, which was, a little bit of a culture shock. They thought they were moving to, New York City, and they moved to Buffalo. And they're coming from, Egypt and Paris, and then you're freezing your butt off here, in like 6 feet of snow, And then they moved to Brooklyn and Queens, okay? And so there's a big mix of cultures in New York City, okay? So nobody said anything about it, whatever. For the most part. There was, used to be a lot of racism, but, amongst creative people, no one ever cared. And so Sylvain met this Colombian kid, Billy Murcia, and he kind of looked like a lot like what you think Mark Bolan with the curly hair, like a Colombian Mark Bolan, okay? And he became a drummer, and they were childhood friends, and they started playing together. And the thing about them is that they were into style and everything. They had a couple different bands before the Dolls, and so they also had a fashion company called Truth and Soul. Like, they were into style, dressing up and looking cool, and they called it profiling. Like, you put on your coolest, badass thing and go to Central Park Fountain and walk around like a peacock and try to attract, some girls or be cool, basically. But it was called profiling to those guys, And so they were very, aware of their image, very image conscious people. And they were creative. So then the thing is that they had this company that made clothing, and they made some money from that, even when they were like still teenagers, okay? Sylvain and Billy. And they sold a lot of the rights to the company, and they made a big bunch of money, and they traveled. And Sylvain would go to England and like go see T-Rex in England and like buy cool clothes in England, which was selling really cool clothes there, There was starting to be cool rock clothes here, but there wasn't like all the places to get it. You kind of had to invent the style yourself then, Yeah. It was very bohemian kind of lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And he's like that. He's a world traveler, and those guys were. And so you already got two guys from two different countries right there. And then they met up with the rest of the guys from the Dolls, and who were to become New York Dolls. And Sylvain already had the name for New York Dolls from New York Doll Hospital, which was a place that fixed broken dolls. Yeah. It was a place, if you broke your doll, you brought it to the New York Doll Hospital.
Wow.
And they used to rehearse across the street from this place in an old bicycle shop. And the guy was so afraid they were going to steal something, he would lock them in every rehearsal and then let them out like they were in jail to rehearse.
Jeez.
So then he saw that New York Doll Hospital. He was inspired and kept that name in his back pocket. And so when he was away, some of the other guys started a band called the Dolls without him. Okay, so when he came back, he said he started to play with them again, and he said, well, if I'm going to be in the band, it has to be called the New York Dolls. And so the name really came from him. And,
were you running around with these guys during this time, or when did you first interact with them?
I was a real little kid when those guys were getting started. And but the thing is, you could go in bars or go to outdoor shows or go to big venues or clubs, and people really didn't care then, honestly, here. It was pretty much outlaw. It was like an outlaw place. You could do whatever you want. There wasn't too many rules here then. It was pretty much like unwatched, so I could go sneak into a bar or club or whatever, or if I knew about people were doing something, I would go a lot of times outdoors or something. Plus I was playing music already, even as a little kid, so I would want to go and like watch people play and try to learn what they're doing, and
right.
So that was a good way to learn, just to see like what these people were doing, how they set up, what they did, how they interacted, and try to pick up some tips. And so even as a little kid, I would just go up to them and say, why did you do that? Why do you do that? And very curious, and try to learn from these guys who were, when I look back, they were trying to learn themselves, some of these people, but, right. They had the nerve to, just go on stage and do whatever they felt was their routine, and they were entertaining. So early bands I saw would be like, people that would be playing in the park, in Central Park, in different parks around the city. And then, when I would try to study with people, sometimes they would be performing, or their friends, or they would tell me about a show and I would go to it. And my dad loved jazz, so he would always want to go to the jazz shows at the Village Vanguard and other places like that. So I saw and met all the most famous jazz guys when I was a little kid because my dad loved that. Art Blakey and Buddy Rich and Max Roach and, you know, all those guys, you know, all those people. And so those people were pretty musicians and pretty like intense living people too. And then also some of the blues guys were still around then, like when I was little, like Howlin' Wolf and, you know, Muddy Waters and all these guys. And this is like the roots of what became rock and roll, you know. And I mean, the Rolling Stones just take their name from, you know, a song, you know, that they're inspired by. So the thing is that these guys were all impressed by somebody else, and they were kind of trying to do their version of it. So New York Dolls was kind of like their version of the British, like the Stones and all these other bands combined. Bands that they liked in the blues roots, because they had a lot of roots to their playing. And they weren't trying to be virtuosos. They liked the songs, and they wanted to be exciting. And, you know, they attracted a lot of girls to their shows, which a lot of bands didn't. And so that was like a whole scene, because New York, like I said, there wasn't clubs then so much. So the Dolls would play like in a hotel, like the Mercer Arts Center was like in a hotel, the Broadway Central Hotel. It was in the back side of it was a separate part of the hotel. And so Mercer Arts Center was like a creative place where people were like doing art and all kinds of other stuff. Well, they started playing there. And so did a lot of other people played there. The Magic Tramps and Aerosmith and all people played or rehearsed there. You know,
one of the guys from the Magic Tramps actually lives here. I'm trying to remember his name right now, but our friend Cher Bach is friends with him.
Seth Coleman.
Yes,
the drummer. He's great. Yeah, he could tell you all. He could tell you all about Mercer Arts Center, because after a rehearsal for Magic Tramps, that's when the whole building collapsed and fell down.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Yeah, the whole place collapsed because these places were neglected and, you know, weren't being kept up. And, you know, this whole building just collapsed. And, you know, yeah, it's pretty scary. It was reenacted on that series vinyl, but, you know.
But it was supposed to be the Dolls in that one, right?
Yeah, it was not when the Dolls were playing. But the Magic Tramps were a really cool band that had this guy, Eric Emerson, was a singer that was like a really charismatic guy that would put on a show himself at the back room of Max's, would get on a table and start like basically stripping and doing whatever to entertain people and himself. And so he was a real exhibitionist type of dude. And so Magic Tramps was a really cool band that you know, had some influence on Kiss, because sometimes they'd play with this guy who was a fire breather, and that's the guy who Gene learned from. So the thing with Kiss is that all these bands were around, like the Dolls and Magic Tramps and the Rags and the Brats and on, right? And they were all cool, but a lot of them never had a real release. Like some of them had some songs on the Max's Kansas City album, but a lot of them never had a real album come out, and so they didn't kind of make it to being a national act. They were just like a cool thing here, like they were artists, you know. And Kiss kind of went around to every band that was cool and kind of took the best of all of those bands. And early on, like fairly early on, I mean, Kiss wasn't a local band for very long. And they got a big support team with Bill Aucoin and Sean Delaney and Joyce and all these other people. They had like a management, press, and all kinds of things right away behind them. And that's what really, you know, propped them up and helped them get to another level, people believing in and investing in them, you know, and they got a record deal really quick. And so, you know, they were not a local band for very long. Like they played a show in New York. The first show they played in New York was at Bleecker Street. It was in a loft that was owned by, that was the Brats. It was like a factory, and like the Brats used to rehearse there. And so the show, it cost $1, and it was Kiss, the Brats, and Wayne County, who I later played with and later played a lot and recorded with. So you know, Wayne County was like a really cool, and it still now is known as Jane County, and is still a really cool punk rock, theatrical, amazing performer, energetic, like rock and roller. And same with the Brats were like similar to the Dolls, they were like Anglophiles. They were very much into the Stones and all these other bands in England, like the Sweet and T-Rex and Slade and all that. And the singer of the Brats, Keith West, he owned a record store in Queens, and Paul Stanley and everybody used to go there, Johnny Thunders and everybody. And these guys knew about cool music, and they would tell you, like, buy this record, it's really cool. Like, oh, you like Sweet? Like, check these guys out. And so Keith was, and still is, a really cool guy, and he still has a version of the Brats that plays. And what happened is Paul Stanley asked Keith, like, we need to play in the city. Can we please get on the bill with you guys? And they, they did. They played with him at this loft, and then other times, like at Hotel Diplomat. Mm-hmm. And the Brats was a very influential band here, but they didn't make it like worldwide.
Yeah.
But they had a chance. They got offered to make a record for Sire Records, which had the Ramones and other people on their label. Yeah. And but by the time they got offered a deal, they they got offered like $10,000 or whatever it was, and that's how much. Like the first Ramones album, I think, cost under $10,000, and the second one cost like $10,000, whatever. But by then the Brats were like, well, Kiss is huge now, and we have to we need like $200,000 because we're gonna have to have a magic show and all this stuff all of a sudden. And they should have just put out their album, because they were a rock band. They weren't like a big performance thing, even though he is an entertaining guy. They're entertaining and cool looking, but it wasn't, that type of band, theatrical. And so now, I've talked to Keith about that, and he's like, yeah, we should have made the album. And Rick Rivets was in the Brats, okay? And he was also in the early lineup of the Dolls, the very first lineup, okay, before Sylvain came back from Europe. And they played together a little with Syl and Rick. And, then Rick left and, continued on with the Brats and other bands. And he's passed away. But he's great, influential New York rock person that inspired, certainly Kiss and all kinds of people. So there was people that you may not know about, and but when you were here, that's what was going on. And there wasn't internet. There was just chatter and like gossip about these people, and you saw them around town or you saw them play, and it was cheap to go to shows and often free, and so I went to as many as I could, sometimes twice a day. And like my friend Lee Black Childers was a photographer for 16 magazine, for Rock Scene, for Hit Parader, and also for Andy Warhol. And he was vice president of Main Man for David Bowie and all this stuff. So, what happened is he would make money like shooting for all the magazines. So, besides doing these other jobs, he would take any photography jobs too. So he might be shooting in the morning at like a hotel with Elvis, and then in the afternoon for 16 magazine with like the Jackson 5, and at night Alice Cooper is playing at Max's. Like I have, a proof sheet of like one day of photos of Lee, and it's got all those three people in one day. So I was like,
that's awesome.
And the thing about New York Dolls and Ramones and these people is that, well, certainly Ramones, when they started, were influenced by a lot of cool bands, but they couldn't play like them, so they just kind of came up with their own sound. And some people thought they were a parody when they first started because they couldn't believe it. And they would fight on stage and all this stuff. And there wasn't like joking, like they had a very strange personal relationships. And so
they really were like a family.
They were, and it was really, but don't get in between them, like if you're an outsider either,
Right.
And so that was the thing, that these guys like did their own thing, and they were creative, and it took a while caught on really quickly, but the Ramones, New York Dolls, and some of these other bands, even though they're pioneers and influential, they didn't sell a ton of records. They didn't have a hit record, and if they played anywhere else out of the city, sometimes they'd get booed and stuff thrown at them. Like goes back to what I said about New York being like a gang. Like if you used to go play in some other town and we're from New York, boo, people would throw, whatever at you, and so anyway, it was a whole thing. But the fun thing about being here was everything was here, and you could kind of take inspiration from, and nobody slept. You just were up at all hours doing whatever, and people would kind of there was different little cliques of people, but if you knew the right people, you could just kind of walk in anywhere. It's amazing in that way. And I had a friend that performed on top of a hotel as a fire eater and everything, and he ended up he was very friendly with Jimi Hendrix and danced on stage with Led Zeppelin. His name was Mike Quashie. He was from Trinidad, and this is a guy who's not even a rock and roll guy. He's a guy from the islands. He's the fire eater and the king of the limbo. He could go under a limbo pole, but he influenced glam rock more than a lot of people because he influenced Jimi Hendrix, and he taught him about fire, Shango, and Jimi Hendrix was from Seattle, Washington. Okay. Mm-hmm. He came here and he was wearing a suit with slick black hair.
Yeah.
He looked like Nat King Cole or something. He didn't look like what we think of Jimi Hendrix. Well, he was friends with, be friends with Mike Quashie, who wore scarves and all this stuff because he was from the island, and he picked up on that style very much. And he used the fire and everything. And, it was a super talented and charismatic guy in his own right. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's Jimi Hendrix. And Jimi Hendrix just wanted to play. He would go into any bar at any time of night and get up and play with anyone. And my uncles and dad seen him play in little bars, just passing the hat and stuff like that before he even played at Cafe Wow when he was called Jimmy James and everything. And then he played as a backing guy for Isley Brothers, Little Richard, all kind of people. Yeah. And, they wouldn't want him to dress up, and they wanted to just be in the background. And he got influence from Mike and started, tripping out and looking like how we come to know his look. And that influenced Aerosmith and Kiss and all these other people in some ways. They took all the best from the best, and then they did their own thing with it. Kiss, you can say, oh, this song is from that, this song is from that, but really they took a little from each act. And then of course Alice Cooper was a super huge band when I was a kid, and that was a fun band to be into when you were a kid because they did all kind of horror movie stuff on stage, the guillotine and the electric chair, and they looked like ghouls, and they had a crazy stage show. So that inspired Kiss and a lot of other bands too. But New York has a hard, or at least when I was a kid, had a it was a hard place, and so you had to be kind of thick-skinned to run around and not take offense to stuff and just let it roll off your back or whatever, and just you got a certain type of mentality from walking around in the streets. But so then you have bands like Ramones who have that tough image, and and bands like Kiss who had in their early days this tough street image, and and New York Dolls who certainly had a bohemian image, so that's like style. It's not fashion. It isn't somebody telling them what to wear. It's this is how we feel. It's really art until it became made into money later for some of these bands, and it got formulated, and that's a whole different thing. But for the first inspiration of being here in the city, most people that live here can tell you that it's got everything. It's got, and when you go away for a while and you come back, you realize wow, it really is a cool place. And
it's amazing to think about how, even back then in the 70s especially, how all these things that we've come to know and love later on, were all so tightly intermingled and kind of coming up all in the same ecosystem.
Yeah, well, here's the thing where, New York, a lot of times the British things was influenced the American rock scene, right? There's a lot of great British rock bands that I love. But here's a example of how New York really helped the British rock scene. Okay, like I was talking about, Jane County, was Wayne County before, the first transgender rocker. Okay, and Wayne County was DJ at Max's Kansas City and had cool bands, the Electric Chairs and Toilet Boys and all these different versions. And Mark Bell, who later became Marky Ramone, was the drummer in one of her bands. And Jerry Nolan, New York Dolls, was in one of her bands. And Tommy Ramone, was in one of her bands too. Queen Elizabeth, it was called. And so Andy Warhol was a big part of New York scene. So Jane County, then Wayne County, got in some Warhol plays with my neighbor, Penny Arcade, and Patti Smith, and people like this, right? And then there was a Warhol play made called Pork, which is kind of a parody of Andy Warhol, with people playing him and his other people around him. It was made from his phone messages. It's a really like strange kind of play. But there was a play called Pork, and it was playing here, and it played in the Roundhouse in London, which was a big old train station. You might have heard of some rock bands playing there.
Yeah, the Ramones had some big shows there.
The Ramones had the show on the 4th of July in 1976 that started punk rock in England.
Yep.
And I'll get to that. But first, this thing, Pork, happened, which was a play about Andy Warhol with Wayne County, Cherry Vanilla, all these people, that later became a performer, became known, but got their start like in this theatrical thing in England. And everybody came to this thing. Rod Stewart and every rock star came to it, and David Bowie came to it as a young artist, and he saw what the power of Warhol people. They were like superstars. Like Andy Warhol, if he like took you in under his wing, you were called like a Warhol superstar, and you could kind of make a career from that, So, and a lot of them did, and some in movies, modeling, whatever, fashion, something. And so they did this show, Pork, and David Bowie decided, when I go to America, I'm hiring these Warhol people to be my team. And he was very smart, because when he came here, he wasn't, when he wasn't Ziggy Stardust yet. He still had the long hair and a dress and all that stuff, and hunky dory and all this stuff. He still wasn't Ziggy Stardust. But when he came here, he got bumped up to this new Ziggy Stardust and all this image, and he had his team here was called Main Man, and that was made up of a lot of the people that were in Pork. Tony Zanetta was the president of Main Man. My friend Lee Black Childers was the vice president. Cherry Vanilla, all these people, they ran his company, and they went around and made him famous. They booked his tour. Cherry Vanilla booked him in Carnegie Hall. They went around and paid people off and had sex with people and gave them drugs to do whatever they had to do, get them played on the radio. Nobody wanted to know David Bowie at this point. They just shoved it down everybody's throat, and they took it around. They made him famous in this country. They helped make David Bowie famous through visual.
Like the original street team.
Yeah.
They were like the original street team, and he was smart because he knew the power in culture of Andy Warhol, and he used that to his advantage. He was very smart. And David Bowie's a guy who knows who to work with, And David Bowie became a New Yorker, and he died here. Okay, so David Bowie could have lived anywhere in the world, and it just goes to show you that he lived here because he fed off the energy of the city. So that's one example where, New York gave it back. We gave it back to him. And another example is, yes, when the Ramones were getting ready to go play in England, they weren't like a big celebrity thing here yet, but they were popular. But they weren't they didn't have hit records or, they were played on the radio, but they were a New York band, New York favorite. But they went to go play on the day of the bicentennial, July 4th, 1976. And they played at the Roundhouse, and everybody came that became all the British punk guys. And Dee Dee told me they'd been pulling people in through the bathroom window because they couldn't afford to get in, like Joe Strummer and all these guys. And, I got to know Joe Strummer, and he said, yeah, absolutely. and bands that became the Pistols and all this stuff. And the Sex Pistols actually comes out of the New York Dolls, because Malcolm McLaren was managing the Dolls in like 70, in the mid 70s when they went down to Florida, and Johnny Thunders and Jerry Nolan quit and came back here, and so they got this guy who we know later as Blackie Lawless to fill in for Johnny Thunders, and they put him at the back of the stage and teased his hair, and they didn't even tell anybody it wasn't Johnny Thunders. Nobody knew then, because you just had the album cover pictures. What we had then was like Rock Scene magazine. Right. That was like, if something was going on in New York, it was in Rock Scene magazine, and if you were in that, you were like an influencer of today. You know what I mean? Like, there wasn't any of this internet or cell phones, or there was the news, the radio, and radio played everything on one station, like Black Sabbath, Tiny Tim, Frank Sinatra, one after the other, and they didn't even like, it wasn't like rock. It was just like any kind of music. So it was a big mix of everything, and it was normal to us because that's what it was. Later, it got all segmented, and it kind of like, because everyone's trying to pretend they're inventing something. It's like, it's still rock and roll, but okay, we play like slop rock or whatever you say. Okay, good for you. Like, you're playing rock and roll. And so these guys went down to Florida. It wasn't working. Malcolm McLaren was kind of, he wasn't their manager really. He was like kind of working with them to try to, I don't know. He was friends with them, and Sylvain knew him from when he had the clothing company. Sylvain actually had a place up in Woodstock before anybody had like, fashion trade shows and all that stuff. They had boutique shows in hotels, but he had a place up in Woodstock with Billy, that Truth and Soul place. And, there wasn't that many people there. People weren't into rock. You didn't go buy rock and roll clothes. You wore rock and roll, and you wore whatever with attitude. You know what I mean? So, this is the same thing. Like, everything old then was just called junk. It wasn't called vintage. It was just like, oh, there's some junk. Okay, here's an old jacket and a sweater and, whatever. And New York Dolls could buy a bunch of stuff off the street on Orchard Street that was meant for like, women, and wear it. And then they're like set, and it cost them like $10, it didn't cost a fortune. And so the Dolls went to Florida with Malcolm McLaren. And originally they had played these shows here called the Red Patent Leather shows, where he had them playing under a hammer and sickle flag, and like a Russian flag dressed all in red, which these guys were not political. They didn't even know or care what the heck, whatever. No. And it just was like, this is during Vietnam, and people got really pissed off about this. And already these guys were thought of as like, freaks, for lack of a better word, and so they went down to Florida. That shtick wasn't working, so they just started wearing kind of like fatigues and army, camouflage and stuff. And then the two guys quit, and Sylvain told me that Malcolm McLaren started telling him then, hey, I'm making this band. I want to make this band for you, Sex Pistols. And he also looked to Richard Hell of the Voidoids, and Richard Hell had been in a bunch of bands here. And Richard Hell had spiky hair and clothes with holes in it, before the Sex Pistols,
Yeah, he started that look. Really.
Yeah. He just put on like ripped up stuff. He just whatever. It wasn't like a big statement. It was like, that's my ripped up clothes, whatever. And anyway, but he was Hell. It went with his, his name, his image, whatever, So anyway, and that's another band that Mark Bell, who became Marky Ramone, was in too, was the Voidoids. Yeah. And that and their, Blank Generation and all that. Another Warhol connection there. And so Malcolm said, okay, I'm going to make this band for you, Sylvain, after the Dolls isn't going to happen, and I'm going to make you another band. So, give me a guitar and a keyboard. I'm going to go to England. I'll send you a ticket to bring you over there, and we'll make a band for you in England. Come live in England. All right, great. So he gave him this guitar. Gave that guitar to Steve Jones. It was the one with the girl decoupaged on it, the white Les Paul. And Steve Jones has like made copies of that and sold it to many people, telling them it's like the original one. Like, made a lot of money off that over the years. And
he pulled a Vinnie Vincent on him.
Well, yes, yeah. And so anyway, he never sent Sylvain the ticket to go over. He did send him a letter, and Sylvain mom was living in Coney Island, so they sent this letter. It's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Like, Mrs. Mizrahi, please give this letter to Sylvain. It's got all these little like photo booth pictures of this guy could be called Johnny Rotten, and has like pictures of them in a photo booth. He picked out the people like a boy band.
Wow.
Band. Yeah.
Is that a well-known thing? Because like I don't think I've ever heard that Sylvain was initially supposed to be part of the Sex Pistols.
Yeah, it was made for him by Malcolm, but he never ended up joining it. And Malcolm got these other guys over there with Vivian Westwood, and they put it together there without Sylvain. But they originally intended for him to be in it because they knew him way before the Dolls, like I said.
Wow.
And you can see in Sylvain's book the photos of. I'll send it to you. I have those pictures of these guys in the photo booth in the letter. It's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So that's that. So that's one thing, and that handed some punk back to England right there,
Right.
And then then so here's another connection you guys will probably like. I don't know if you know this one, but when Mark Bell was a kid, he was in a heavy metal band called Dust.
Yeah, with Richie Wise.
Yeah,
and
Kenny Aronson and Richie Wise, who produced the first couple Kiss albums. And not only that, the tech for the band was J.R. Smalling.
Oh, no kidding. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and there's video footage. And J.R. Smalling, as you know, probably was a drummer. And he plays on some of those demos for God of Thunder, and you probably heard those. J.R. was like a pretty damn good drummer. And anyway, so J.R., there's footage of JR like working with Dust, like at this outdoor show. I'll send it to you guys. You won't believe it.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
and so this is when Mark Bell was like a kid. These guys were like teenagers, and they had Dust, and then they went on to other things. Richie Wise produced the first two Kiss albums. He made a fortune off that. They had also produced Brother Louie for Stories. So this is back then these. The bubblegum labels, Buddha, that became, Neil Bogart, that became Casablanca. So it kind of all spun out of all this scene. It just kept regurgitating itself till it like finally cashed in on Kiss and a couple of these bands, really, And so Mark Bell, Mark the Ramone, he's got a big mega history. He actually auditioned for New York Dolls. So what happened is, the original New York Dolls, the drummer was Billy Murcia, the Colombian guy I told you about. Well, the New York Dolls were playing, there was no clubs. They're playing this dumpy hotel that fell down, okay? And they're playing like a few clubs in, like they played Coventry and those places, Diplomat. All those places where Kiss played, the Dolls played there too. All these falling down hotels that eventually fell down or got demolished in Coventry and, mob run bars, And so they didn't tour. They just played like around the 5 boroughs or whatever. Maybe they went to Bridgeport, Connecticut or something, but they didn't go far. And Ramones only used to play here and in like Toronto. That's it. Like they didn't tour. They just, until they had an album. And so what happened is all these people would be like playing these little theaters like the Dolls, and the Dolls brought up a lot of excitement, and they got a slot opening for Rod Stewart in the Faces at Wembley State in England, right? Probably one of the biggest shows of their career, and they didn't have an album out yet. So they went to open for. They were supposed to open for Rod Stewart in the Faces at Wembley, and then do some shows with some other bands and a little tour with Lou Reed. Well, they got to England, and Lou Reed said, "I don't want them on the stage with me," and banned them from all his shows. So he kicked them off the bill. So all those shows were screwed right away. And so then they played it at Wembley with the Faces, okay? And then they had some other shows to do, but then they did a couple of them. But what happened is Billy, the drummer, was hanging out with these people, and he OD'd, and these people put him in a bathtub, and he drowned. He died in England. Yeah. So the first time these guys left the country, well, not Sylvain, but he had already traveled. But the first time they traveled, this guy, the friend died. They had to come back. So when they came back here, people that auditioned for them were Peter Criss, Jerry Nolan, and Mark Bell. And Peter Criss and Jerry Nolan grew up together, childhood friends in Brooklyn. Have you ever seen Lydia Crisp's book, Sealed with a Kiss?
Yeah. Yeah, well, those guys were super tight.
Yeah, well, they were super good buddies as kids, and they grew up playing, and Jerry really taught Peter a lot and was like a super cool guy and super great drummer. And they both loved Gene Krupa, and they'd go see Gene Krupa, and then Peter got to open for Gene Krupa at the Metropole, and like every drummer in New York would go see Gene Krupa. Like he was like the king of drums, you know. He's the first guy to make drumming famous. And Jerry Nolan was very much that kind of drummer, like showy and like, you know, classy dude, and, you know, jazz influenced rock. And Peter was too, like that, you know. And Peter actually plays Gene Krupa solos in like 100,000. I'm a drummer, so
yeah.
So Peter actually plays like 100,000 Years as like a Gene Krupa solo from way back from like 1939. You know, Drum Boogie, there's a couple of solos, you know, Gene Krupa sing. And so anyway, these guys were like childhood friends, and they already lost the drummer. And Buddy Bowser, who's a sax player, he plays on the first Dolls record, right? He plays sax on Can't Put Your Arms Around a Memory, Lonely Planet Boy, and Can't Put Your Arms Around a Memory. He would play live with them, and sometimes they had two sax players. But he grew up with Jerry Nolan, and he very much advocated for them to take Jerry in the band. And so then they had Jerry, and then they got, you know, finally got a record deal, and more stuff happened. And they toured with Kiss. And this is a funny story you guys might like. When Kiss, sometimes it'd be bills like Kiss, New York Dolls, Aerosmith, Silverhead. But sometimes like Kiss and the Dolls would play, not too many, but they were definitely fans of each other, and they go to each other's shows. They were peers, you know. And so Paul Stanley said to Sylvain, Sylvain, how will I know when I made it? And Sylvain said, look, Alice Cooper is the king. So when somebody asks you for Alice Cooper's autograph, just say, oh, thank you, and sign it, and just, you've made it. And so that's it. You know, not even they're even going to ask him for, or know who he is. Like if they ask you for Alice Cooper's autograph, you're a star, because Alice Cooper is the king. So don't even say you're not him. Just make the people happy. Sylvain was kind of like a vaudevillian type guy, just like do anything to entertain people. Yeah. So he was kind of like selfless that way. So he was just
funny.
Yeah. So one time they're in O'Hare Airport, and Paul Stanley comes running up to Sylvain, all out of breath, and like, Sylvain, I made it. I just signed my first Alice Cooper autograph.
Oh man, awesome.
There was kind of a division then. Like these people were like, it's funny because the Ramones aren't what you think of the look of a punk band. Like they had long hair, and they didn't, you know, I mean, they didn't have spiky hair. They had long hair and didn't wear, you know, they did have holes in their pants when they would wear out, but not, you know, as a fashion statement. But, you know, I later made clothes for Joey Ramone, you know, just from knowing these guys since I was a kid. Eventually, like, I ended up like working with them, like making clothes for, you know, a lot of my band, which was like a very theatrical band called Flying 69, which was like almost like a Kiss, Alice Cooper type thing. And so I just had to make those clothes because you couldn't buy them. And then people would know that I made them and ask me to work on their clothes, which I didn't really know how to do, but I would just try to do it, and then the clothes would fall apart. But eventually I learned how to do it, and then I made clothes for a lot of bands in New York, including Degeneration, who are my friends. And then they went on the road opening for Kiss on the reunion, and they opened for the Ramones, and they opened for Cheap Trick, and they opened for Social Distortion. But anyway, so Joey Ramone loved them, and he asked, you know, them, who's making your clothes? And then he asked me to make his clothes. So
that must have been a trip to get asked that.
It's incredible. And I was always asking him, hey, I'll because I would see him around all the time, and they're like, oh, I'll make something for you. Just like call me up. And he would never call, but you know, he was always nice, but he's very like kind of nervous person. And, you know, he had a lot of social stigma. Like he would go in a club and go up against a wall and just kind of look down. He kind of lived in this like 4 or 5 block radius around his apartment. He just like went to this club, that restaurant, this every day pretty much. So you'd see him like every time. And he was friendly, but he was a little bit nervous and had a lot of problems, health and otherwise. But to get to, called from him to like come make my clothes, I went right over there, and then just became like super close friends. And then I ended up playing with Dee Ramone some shows and ended up playing on his last album.
I wanted to ask you about that. Who was in the band with when you were with Dee Dee? Who else was playing with you guys?
Dee Dee. That's it. Me and Dee Dee.
It was just two of you?
Yeah. What happened is he had a bunch of bands, okay? And towards the end of his life, he was getting kind of fed up because he wanted to just play. And sometimes these guys would always, like, he'd be rehearsing and they would be like, I have to go, do something. I have to go get drugs. I have to whatever. And he just wanted to play. And so he would kind of get annoyed. So I actually went to L.A. to visit a friend of mine, some friends of mine. And but everyone was kind of busy. So I was thinking, like, why did I even come here? Because what am I doing? Like, no one's around. And my friend Howie, who was in Degeneration, had just joined Danzig. So he was living at Danzig's house. So I went to Danzig's, and but they were just like starting to get together, and so I just split and did some other stuff. Not like I could have stayed there or whatever, but I just went out and see what else there is to do. And I noticed Dee Dee was doing a book signing at Borders Books, so I went to it, and he said, "Hey, come to my event tomorrow at the Knitting Factory in L.A. It's a art show, and I'm reading from my book, and I'm going to play." Oh, great. So I went early, and when I got there, he had already fired his band, and he was really upset, and he was going to leave. And I said, "You're going to leave? I'll keep this whole event for you. Like, you're going to, he had all his paintings up. He did art with Paul Kostabi, and he had a couple books out there, and he was going to read from them and whatnot. And he was supposed to perform. And he said, "Hey, I've known you so long. Why don't we just play?" So just the two of us played. That's it. Okay?
Yeah.
No rehearsal. I just got up and played.
Wow.
I didn't even have drumsticks. I wasn't even supposed to be there. It just happened, right?
Holy shit.
And so then he said, "Okay, I've known you for so long. Let's just play." So the two of us played. All these people came up, and Exene from X, and all kinds of people came up and like spoke and read poetry, and we played. And he read from his book, and he read this poem about Joey who had passed away, and people were crying. And we played like 30 songs in a row, and then he broke a couple strings, and that was it. And so and then he said, "I really want you to. I'm doing an album, and I want you to play drums on it." So I said, "Great." And he goes, "Why don't you come and rehearse?" So we went to rehearse at the studio out there, and his wife Barbara came and played bass because he taught her to play bass. She didn't play at the show. It was just me and Dee Dee. And then so Barbara rehearsed with us, and we rehearsed for like half hour, and Dee Dee says, "Do you want to take a break?" I'm like, "No." And then another half hour, "Want to take a break?" "No." We played like 2 hours, and he's like, "I have to take a break. This is the longest I've ever rehearsed for." I'm like, "Okay." So someone knocked on the door, and it was Flea from the Chili Peppers.
Oh, wow.
And they hugged, and they were good buddies, and Chili Peppers were rehearsing there. Iggy was rehearsing there.
Wow.
Danny Sage from Degeneration was recording an album there that I actually played on the demos for. I saw Clem Burke in the hall. He's like, "I heard your demos. I'm playing on the album." So it was the whole weird thing. And we
it's like a family reunion.
Yeah. And all these like New York people, were there, and we went and jammed with the Chili Peppers, and that was fun. And so I ended up playing with him, and then I played on his album with Paul Kostabi produced. Now, Paul Kostabi, his brother Mark Kostabi did the cover. They're artists and they're musicians. And Mark Kostabi did the cover of Use Your Illusion for Guns N' Roses. Yeah, he didn't do it for them. It was a painting that was up in an art gallery, and Axl bought it, and it was already named Use Your Illusion. So Axl bought that painting and called the album Use Your Illusion. And the second side, that's the second colors variation of it, is like Slash, I think, created that in a computer. Like, it's only the original one, which was a silk screen that Paul Kostabi actually did the silk screen physically, I guess, and named it Use Your Illusion. So these guys are creative people. And Dee Dee said, Paul Kostabi is producing my album. I want you to play on it. and he's in New York, so I knew who Paul was, but I didn't know him that well, and I played on Dee Dee's album that became his last album. It's called Youth Gone Mad, featuring Dee Dee Ramone, and Paul Kostabi is from Whittier, California, and he started the band White Zombie. He started in California. He had a band called Youth Gone Mad. They had a local hit called Okie Dogs, which was about a hot dog stand. Okie Dogs, kind of like in Hollywood, they have Pink's hot dog stand. Well, where he was from, they had Okie Dogs, and so he had Youth Gone Mad, and they had Okie Dogs. So then he came to New York. He started White Zombie. He's on the first recordings of White Zombie with Peter Landau on drums, and he taught Shania Salt to play bass. She was a keyboard player originally. And anyway, so then he left White Zombie, but he did help put the band together. And then he made a band called, he had a bunch of bands. One was called Psychotica, who actually was on Lollapalooza with Ramones and Metallica and everything. And we had a band together called Super Numb Live Machine, which had a record deal in Russia. So it's like Dee Dee knew, everyone, and he introduced me to all these people, and then I end up playing on all these sessions for all kinds of people, recording with people, meeting more people. Paul Kostabi and his brother, here's the art influence in New York mixing with music, is that Mark Kostabi is an artist. So he not only did Use Your Illusion, he did the cover of the Ramones' last album, Adios Amigos.
Oh, I didn't know
with the dinosaurs.
With the dinosaurs,
yeah, he did that too. They were originally called Ine-saurs because Paul Kostabi's real name is Indrek. His nickname is Ine. So anyway, it was originally they had witches' hats on, not sombreros, because Mark Kostabi's some of his little tokens he has in his paintings are like a witch's pointed hat or a little sphere, and these are things that are commonly in his paintings if you look at his other art. And so the original Adios Amigos painting, I think it was called Ine-saurs, and it had like the dinosaurs had like a little pearl bracelet around their wrist, and Johnny Ramone said, "No way can I have this like little bracelet." So they had to paint over the bracelet, and they put those sombreros on their heads, and they called it Adios Amigos. I did play on his album. He actually did a blues album with Paul that never came out. It's really cool. And he was a really great guy to know. And there was a time when he was kind of a horror show because he's, had suffered with addiction. And a lot of these guys died, when they were kids, and because drugs, and it's sad that we lost a lot of these people. But by the time CBGB's was closing the last nights, I remember talking to the owner of CBGB's at Hilly Crystal and saying, like, it's terrible that the Ramones can't be playing at this and the Dead Boys can't. And, a lot of the bands weren't even around that were the mainstay bands, of the place. And so it was kind of rough for, like, a lot of these guys, bit the dust early. And then, so it's really sad to lose somebody like Sylvain, who's like, one of the last people from this era that was like really cool, like really, really important to New York and to all of rock and roll, really, when you think about it, like an unsung hero, and didn't get his due. And this would really burn him sometimes. Like he would, because his wife Wanda was from Atlanta, so for a while he was living down in Georgia. And I remember he called me one day and he said, "Yeah, I got up and played with Poison at this big venue the other night." And like, that's cool. What did you play? Like, Personality Crisis? Oh no, we had to play like rock and roll all night. I'm like, what the hell is that? What are they saying to the crowd? They can't play a Dolls song. They obviously love New York Dolls. Poison, give me a break.
Direct influence.
Yeah, but they couldn't play like, Looking for a Kiss or something and try to turn people on to the Dolls. So it's kind of a weird, like a lost opportunity. And but anyway, people that were around then know that they were the hottest thing in New York at the time. Everybody wanted to be like them, or be around them, like, Kiss wanted to be like the Dolls, but they couldn't. And they went to go see Alice Cooper and they got inspired by that. So they went more they went more macho,
Well, they weren't pretty enough to be the Dolls.
No, it looked like
it wasn't going to work.
Yeah, it wasn't going to fly. It looked like linebackers or something. But it's funny how then when the Dolls were in Florida and fell apart, Arthur Kane and some other guy on drums. They couldn't even remember that guy's name. Sylvain said they only played one show with Blackie. Like Blackie got up and played one show, and as Johnny Thunders basically, and then Arthur Kane moved to L.A. with him and formed Killer Kane, and that's how Arthur ended up in L.A. from that. So you know, and it was funny for me to see Arthur in L.A. and stuff. He was really out of his element, you know. And
he's a definite New York guy.
Oh, big time.
Yeah.
And you know, it was like these guys had these old feuds and stuff. And you know, when Dee Dee died, I had all this stuff going on, and I was touring with this other band with, you know, Sam Yaffa from Hanoi Rocks, a friend of mine. I was in a band with him called Madwana. Like I met Hanoi Rocks when they first came to the U.S. and I was, you know, met Razzle and all that. And another band that's influenced by New York Dolls, obviously.
Oh, yeah, hugely.
And another band that's influenced Guns N' Roses, Mega, like Underwater World, and Welcome to the Jungle is from Underwater World, you know. And if you know Hanoi Rocks, you know what the deal. And so you know, it's like I couldn't go to Dee Dee's funeral, and I was pretty upset about it too. And I called Arthur Kane and I said, you got to go to Dee Dee's funeral. And they had this feud over some girl that tried to kill both of them actually. And I can't. We had this big feud. I'm like, the guy's dead. Just please go to his funeral for me and let me know what happens. And he did go. He went from Blondie, and they went. I'm glad they went. And
that's good.
And I was so happy for Arthur that he got back in the Dolls, and he lived his whole life to be back in it again. And he finally did.
That whole documentary documenting that whole process that's one of the most heartwarming things I've ever seen, is that whole story.
Well, that's just the thing, and that's a good point. These guys are all heart. They're all heart, and they're all like spirit. And a lot of bands today and a lot of recordings, you can make like a perfect recording in perfect time, perfect tuning, whatever, and you just feel nothing, you know? Like these guys like were pretty raw, and they like made everybody feel something. And that's really cool. They had a lot of heart and soul, what they were doing. They had a lot of attitude and style, not fashion, style. And even Kiss, like they weren't wearing like fashionable clothes. People were like, what the hell is this, you know?
Right.
You know, it was kind of funny because when Kiss came out, like, you know, glam was kind of already over, like here, you know, and then they came out and like, oh, okay, whatever. And but the thing about Kiss is that they weren't a sloppy, you know, like the Dolls. They were like very well rehearsed in their vocals, and they had tons of gear, and they were very professional. Like other bands, if they're true to themselves, they said at the time, when these guys came out, we were like, wow, okay, this is like not messing around. So like I said, they weren't a local band for a long time. And
they outworked everybody else, it seemed like.
They had a really serious work ethic, and they had other people depending on them and lighting a fire under them to get it together, and they did. And they had a big support system, like I said. And I helped write a couple books about this, and one is called Lost Rockers, and one is called New York Rock, and work with an author named Stephen Bless. He wrote American Hardcore, and so we made a book called Lost Rockers, and it talks about people who kind of fell through the cracks, and, you know, they're talented, but, you know, didn't get a break or whatever it is. And one of these guys in there is, you know, Rick Fox, who Rick Fox was a guy who's from New York. He had some bands here, and he was like a young rock and roll guy, and he played all the little clubs. And he went out with Peter Chris's sister, and he would go see Kiss rehearse in the Loft when they first started.
We've had him on a couple of times.
Oh yeah, and then he had the Martian.
Out with Rick.
He had the Martian rock band, and then he went to L.A. and he played with Yngwie, and, you know, he named Wasp. You know, he was in Wasp. He named it, and so, you know, it's like this place was like a Wild West. You know, you could kind of, it wasn't all figured out. The business wasn't figured out, and there wasn't really rules, so you could kind of just, if you had the nerve, you could do something. And now everything's so business, and it's a different world, you know?
Yeah.
Like, how do you guys feel are you guys from Nashville?
I am. Aaron's not.
Okay. So has it changed since you
Oh,
get,
God, yes.
you know?
Big time.
Even in just the time that I've been here in the last, I guess, almost 20 years, it's changed a lot. I can't imagine somebody that grew up here, but I guess that's that way everywhere.
Yeah, well, here especially, because here there was a lot of like really weird one-off places that, you know, looked like, you know, on the verge of falling down and then did fall down. But, you know, we just had a place here closed called Gem Spa. And what this place was like a newsstand and like a hangout place. Like nobody would ever build a place like this today, because how are you supposed to make any money with it? It's like a place for like delinquents to hang out and play pinball. And like, you know, originally it was like, this place was almost 100 years old. It was in the East Village on St. Mark's Place. And it was a soda fountain place, which had a counter, and people would like, you know, make you whatever, egg cream, which is, you know, a drink that doesn't have egg or cream in it, but it's like, you know, it's a particular drink from New York. And, or you could get, you know, Coca-Cola, whatever, but out of the fountain, right? And they had a newsstand and buy cigarettes and candy. It was like candy, cigarettes. It was like a troublemaker dream. You know what I mean? Right. Like high school, go hang out at Gem Spa and look at like girly magazines and rock and roll magazines and play pinball or whatever, right? So over the years, so on the back of the New York Dolls album cover, they're hanging out in front of Gem Spa. And they, okay. Yeah, and that place now closed. So that place was one of the most New York places in New York that's particular to here. Like you can't replace it. Like, what is it? You know, it's a nightmare. What happened is these people took it over after a while, and they lost their right to sell tobacco and lottery tickets, and that's what they were making any money off of anymore. Like most people don't buy magazines anymore and hang out and play pinball as much anymore. So anyway, there's a lot of places here when I was a kid that were weird. Like, you know, there was a restaurant in Times Square where you'd go in there and they'd never serve you and you would just leave. It was like obviously a front for something. It wouldn't tell you to leave. They would just never come around.
Get
You're
the
like,
hint.
Wow.
like, all right, well, what? You know, there was weird places like that. You go in a place and it had all dust on everything. This guy wanted to manage one of my bands once. He took me up to his office in Harlem, and we go in there, and everything's covered with like an inch of dust, and you know, all these old things. It's a stationery store, but all these things are like from the 30s. It's like
nobody's bought anything.
Yeah, no one's even allowed in there, right? He's just bringing me in there, maybe to kill me. I don't even know what he's doing. And so I go, what is with this stuff? And then he goes, oh, never mind this. So we went in the basement, and there was a whole like casino downstairs, like a gambling function room. So there was like places like that here, you know, and there
cool.
were, yeah, and you know, and in fact, like, you know,
man, you came up in a magical time in a magical place for sure.
Well, yeah, and I think I was inspired by it, and a lot of other people were, and like, you know, some people had varying degrees of success, and like, it's funny because like a lot of guys from my, you know, my generation and stuff are, you know, rockers are like now like writing and making movies and to express themselves, because the industry isn't geared towards rock and roll anymore. It's hard to make any money doing that anymore. And when I was a kid, I made more money off music, you know, even just playing in bars, they would pay you like pretty good. This is like pre-DJ and stuff like that. Like you'd play a weekend in some dumpy bar and here's like $1,200, you know. You can't even get that now to play a bar. Like they don't even want to pay you. And now I saw this thing where Rolling Stone is trying to get people to pay them. You pay them if you want to write for them. Really? Give me a break.
Oh, God.
Give me a break.
Now it's pay to play to write for Rolling Stone.
Give me a break. Look, never one of my favorite magazines anyway. I always loved Rock Scene, Cream, Circus, Hit Parader, Faces. Those were the cool rock and roll magazines. If you even like rock and roll, you know that Rolling Stone isn't cool and it's not rock and roll. It's like these snooty people, that the same people that wanted to keep Kiss out of Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that had a big problem with them. And, you know, too bad. Like, just people were one of the most successful bands ever in the world. You can't keep them out. You know, really, New York Dolls should be in Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. MC5 should be in Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And there's a lot of other people, too. Chubby Checker, for that, you know, random people. But they get it mixed up with hip-hop and other people being in there. And like, I love all kinds of music. I'm not against that, but it's supposed to be the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's really weird.
At least stick to the actual genre.
it's weird. I mean, hey, I mean, I guess they're just trying to attract all kinds of people.
It's all about selling tickets to that event every year. Is all it's about.
Yeah, it's a non-profit organization like the NFL or any other thing, and they're just trying to put asses in the seats and all that. But it was like before it was more about like, these bands here were like proud of who they were, and they were like, we're going to show you guys, like, like the New York Dolls were like the Little Rascals. They're like, we're going to put on a show, they're like, we're going to entertain you. And they weren't about other things, they weren't thinking about the money and all this other crap. They were just having fun trying to be who they were. And, they were kids, they were young people still, teenagers, barely 20 years old. And there was industry then, though, that had real money. And here's another funny thing. Lieber Krebs was a management company, okay? And they managed the Dolls and a new band called Aerosmith at the same time. And they were pretty close style of bands in a lot of ways. But Lieber Krebs was like, these Dolls guys, already one of the guys died, we're going to go with Aerosmith. Yeah, and Aerosmith became this mega huge band, and Kiss became this mega huge band, and the Dolls kind of fell by the wayside, and they inspired Aerosmith. And, Back in the Saddle is like David Johansen from New York Dolls, like stamping his boots with the jingles on his boot in Back in the Saddle. Like these guys were, the Dolls came and took, or Aerosmith came and took the Dolls' sound man, girlfriends, clothing designers, everything.
Dang.
Like Aerosmith came and just took it. They just took it, and they were talented. Whatever, I love Aerosmith, and
I love them too.
Whatever, but there was a time when they were kind of both like the Dolls were ahead. Really, everybody wanted to be the Dolls, and Aerosmith came up and they took it all and ran. And so it was weird to see which bands got super famous and who didn't. There was a band that was great when I was a kid called The Fast, with Paul Zahone. Really cool band. They were top band at like Max's, and they were famous here before Blondie, before the same time as Ramones and all that stuff. But everybody thought they were going to be huge, and the Fast always had different looks, and there's one look where you'd think it was Kiss, where they're dressed up in makeup and dressed like a deck of cards or whatever for one show only. And then they had another look where they were new wave, and then they had they didn't stay with one look, but there's one look where you would look at them and go, whoa, okay. And there's many things that influence Kiss and any theatrical band, because you're always trying to come up with something new. I mean, let's face it, it's hard to keep it fresh. And who thought Kiss would still be playing, right? I mean, nobody's playing right now, but they just played New Year's Eve, whatever, And who would think, wow, like, back in the day, like nobody thought even ahead at all. Like you're lucky to be alive every single day when it was in New York back then. Yeah. Taxi driver in New York, and when these guys were cab drivers, I was a cab driver for a while, but it was still fun. Like it became like there's too much rules. It's no fun anymore. Everything was like Fun City. Everything was open late, and now everything's closed pretty much at like, it's like 9 o'clock or whatever. It's like, crickets out there, it's weird. Used to be like go out at night in Times Square and you thought it was daytime because all the lights were bright and you didn't even think of day or night. And a lot of people had their windows blacked out and you never even cared. You stay up for a couple of days and create. So it was like a whole different world. It's a different world. So,
we were getting close to about 90 minutes, so I think, there's probably a million other things you could touch on. You want to come back on sometime in the future?
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, I hope I answered some of your questions, but if you want to take any questions another time or something, I would be happy to talk to you guys again. You guys are great. I've listened to your shows for years, and I always love when you have the summer, Kiss in July, and all,
we'll do that again.
All your takes on everything is really like right on and cool. I like what,
awesome.
How you make people feel comfortable, and, you guys love music, and, that's what it's been about. You guys seem to like to have fun, and, don't take yourself too serious, and you make it fun. I like the show. I like the show a lot. I mean, thanks for asking me to come on. It's really an honor. And, thanks to everybody out there for listening. And if you want to write some questions, I don't know, I'll try to answer if I come back on. But
that's cool. I was going to say, because this has been kind of like my favorite kind of conversation that we have, where Chris and I ask one question, and you just spend an hour telling us all kinds of awesome stories. Hey, no, that's all good, man. They can hear us anytime. I love it. I love these early 70s New York City stories, man. Fantastic. Maybe what we could do is one night when we're doing a Friday Night Live, maybe you could come on with us, and we'll just take live questions right on the fly.
I would do that. I feel, it was kind of an emotional week with Sylvain passing away. That's very big. Another big guy that passed away is Jerry Brandt. He was a big promoter. He worked he worked with Sam Cooke. He worked for William Morris. He worked for all kinds of famous people. He owned the Ritz. He owned the Palladium, which we didn't even talk about the Palladium and seeing Kiss at Academy of Music and Palladium. I'll tell you about that next time.
Yeah,
I saw Kiss at the Palladium and Academy of Music, the first big New York show. When the first show they had to sign, I was at that with Blue Oyster Cult, Stooges. And,
we have to come back on.
And I was at Eric.
Hey, what are you doing in July?
Yeah, you want to come on in July?
Well, my birthday's in July, so that'd be cool.
We'll celebrate your birthday. We'll talk only about Kiss that day.
I would do that. My friend Eric Carr's birthday was a couple of days away from mine. My birthday's the 13th, and Eric I've celebrated my birthday with one time, and he would call me and ask me to come out to a club and hang out, and he would give me drum stuff. He was super sweetheart of a guy, but it was fun to see like him play his first show at the Palladium, which is the same venue where it was called Academy of Music. When I saw it was the same venue. So I saw so many rock shows there, but in 7 years basically, like Kiss became the biggest band in the world, and then they just played the Garden, and then all of a sudden they're playing at the Palladium, and that's the only show they played in 1980 in the U.S. was that show. It was really weird because the year before they had played 2 nights at the Garden, and I went to every Garden show of Kiss, every single one.
Oh well, then we have a lot to go through when you come back on.
Single one of my friends opened at the reunion, Degeneration, at the Garden.
Yep.
So I could talk about those guys a lot. No problem.
Fantastic.
Cool.
Thank you guys again.